I'm Lisa Stone. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Parenting Aces. Welcome to the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone. If you follow Parenting Aces on social media, you know that I love posting articles that tell the stories of our sport, the history of our sport. And so that's why I was so excited when I got an email from Mark Young, who is in the accounting department at USC, University of Southern California, telling me about a book he had written about the history of the USC men's tennis program. And to be able to share Mark's knowledge of USC tennis, and let me tell you, that knowledge is so extensive, was so thrilling for me because he has done an incredible amount of research for this book, whether it was going to the library and reading articles on the team, talking to past coaches, past players, fans of the team. I mean, Mark has gone above and beyond to pull the stories together into one comprehensive history of the most winningest team in college tennis. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Professor Mark Young, a tennis player himself. He played at Oberlin College and just an incredible tennis fan and now tennis historian. So enjoy this week's podcast with Mark Young. Mark Young from USC, thank you so much for joining us on the Parenting Aces podcast.
Lisa, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, I want to just say from the get-go that they are trimming trees outside my office window today, so I'm just going to apologize up front for any weird sounds y'all hear in the background. There's nothing I can do about it, unfortunately, but we're just going to press on with this interview.
Sounds great.
All right. So, Mark, before we delve into what you are doing right now, I would love for you to give our audience a little bit of background on your life in tennis, how you got started playing, and where tennis has taken you.
Well, Lisa, I started playing tennis in Sydney, Australia, back in the mid-'60s, probably when I was about 11 years old. And in Australia back then, unless you were really, really wealthy or a prodigy of some kind, you had to take group lessons. And so I stood on a tennis court, a red clay tennis court, with 20 other kids, and they wouldn't let us hit a single ball until we had pantomimed tennis strokes, basically till we were completely exhausted. So the lessons were about an hour. We pantomimed forehands, backhands, serves, and volleys. And in the last 10 minutes, that's when you could hit balls. So you can imagine what happens. It sounds a little
like the Russian system.
Well, it felt like I was in a gulag, that's for sure. Because, I think that it created a sense of discipline and an understanding that actually hitting balls like crazy is not the way to really learn tennis. At least that was the principles that some of the Australian coaches were using. And, I wasn't in any kind of fancy camp or anything. This was a guy who'd coached the Junior Davis Cup in Australia. He'd retired. He wanted something to do, on a Saturday morning. And so we just got out there and pantomimed strokes. And we all complained about it. But years later, I would realize, there was a real method to this madness. The funny part, of course, was in the last 10 minutes when you could hit balls, just pandemonium broke loose because we had so much pent-up energy. Balls were flying over fences and traveling at huge velocities just because we had to get this energy out. But after that, my family immigrated to the United States. And in fact, my dad came home. My dad was a well-known scientist in Australia, and he came home one day and he said, guys, we're moving to the United States. And I said to him, oh, man, this is great. I'm so thrilled we're moving to California because, back then, even in Australia, the music of the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean, it was pervasive, and it created an image of Southern California culture that was just something that we all dreamed about. And so when my dad said, "Son, we're not going to California, we're going to Ohio," I was absolutely distraught by that. But it turned out that it was just kind of a weird thing. And I came to we lived in this little town called Worthington, Ohio, just outside of Columbus, and I was hitting against the backboard one day, not knowing a single person, and this guy comes up to me, who happened to be the captain of the men's varsity high school tennis team. I was in 8th grade at the time. He kind of took me under his wing, and after that, I never had any formal lessons at all, but just started playing a lot, and then made the high school tennis team at Worthington High School. Captained the team. Played reasonably well. I think the best I ever did was to get to the state semifinals in doubles. But along the way, I met many, many great tennis players, and I kind of realized that I loved the sport, but frankly, I just wasn't going to be good enough to even think about a major tennis, college tennis career. And I come from a long line of academics, and so I ended up going to Oberlin College in Ohio, a liberal arts school, back then one of the top 5 liberal arts schools in the country. And at the same time, Oberlin had no tennis scholarships. It was purely academics. And so I decided to play on the Oberlin tennis team. And we had a lot of fun, but basically, when you play at a liberal arts school like that, you're there first of all, at least primarily, I think, for the academics, and you have a great deal of fun with the tennis. And so that's what I kind of ended up doing. But, I've always had an incredibly strong love for the game. And, after Oberlin, I went to graduate school and then began moving west out of Ohio and ultimately ended up in Southern California in 1992 when my wife and I were recruited by USC to join the faculty in the Leventhal School of Accounting. And what happened after that was, I guess in the intervening years between Oberlin and, going to Southern California, I played, some tennis very sporadically. My game just kept getting worse and worse, and I was frustrated about that, so I almost quit the game. But moving to Southern California kind of really reinvigorated me, and shortly after I came to USC, I began to talk to some tennis players, but really didn't get into any kind of network until about 2004 when I met a player on the varsity tennis team, and he told me that there was this new coach named Peter Smith who'd come in, and he thought that just for fun I should go down and talk to Peter, seeing I love tennis so much. So I talked to Peter, and we spent some time together, but it wasn't then, another big leap, until 2012 when I was asked to write an article about some great event in USC sports history for a publication the athletic department was going to produce for their alumni. And there was a book called The Trojan Way. So I knew that the USC men's tennis team was going into the four-peat. They'd won national titles in 2009, 10, 11, and this was now, beginning of 2012. So I went down to Peter and I said, Peter, I'd love to follow you guys into the four-peat and write about it for my article for this book. And he said, fantastic, I'd love for you to do that. And so I started going down and talking to the players and watching every match. But in the process of doing that, I realized that, the game that these guys was playing was basically really different from how I learned to play the game. I'm from that generation, of Aussies that basically, hit, open door, closed door forehands and backhands, nothing fancy, very little topspin. And I said to Peter, look, if I'm going to write this article, you're going to have to try to re-educate me in how the modern game is played. And so he took me on the court. His associate coach, Chris Quinta, took me on the court. A number of players took me on the court and said, okay, Mark, this is how you play the game. So I really got into it, Lisa, and I think that as I was writing that article, I looked around the team room at USC. It's this huge room full of photographs and plaques and trophies. And I kept seeing these familiar names on the wall, like Bob Lutz and Stan Smith and Dennis Ralston. And I had no idea that all of these great players had actually graduated from USC. Because when you grow up in Ohio, you're kind of focused on what you're doing there. And as a kid, you don't know, which professionals went to college, or if they did go to college, what schools they went to. So it was a revelation for me to see that these guys were all Trojans. And so after immersing myself in these photos, I went to Peter and I said, Peter, I really, really think that because you're the winningest men's tennis team in American collegiate history, I want to write a book, a full-length book about Trojan tennis. And so that's what I did.
Wow. What a fun story. What a fun book to write.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing was that I had no idea that the tennis team actually began at USC in 1899.
Wow.
And so I thought, if I'm going to write this history, I've got to try and find out as much information as I can about, kind of those early days of tennis in Southern California. And in doing all of that, I started going, into the stacks of Doheny Library, which I hadn't gone into the stacks of a library since I was a graduate student. I started talking to every player I could talk to, and Peter, opened his virtual Rolodex and started giving me names of people to talk to, and I connected with Bob Lutz and Stan and Dennis Ralston and Rick Leach and of course Dick Leach, and all of a sudden people just started saying to me, "Oh, you need to talk to this person. Have you talked to that guy?" And so soon I had this enormous list of people that I wanted to interview, and in the research I do, at USC, I do research inside companies, and the way I like to do research is actually to go in and try to stand in the shoes of the people who are in those companies to get their perspective on why they, how and why they do what they do. And so I use the same techniques in writing this book to interview people and to try to get into their heads and into their shoes to see the game from their point of view. And it was a fascinating process. And along the way, some of these all-time greats hit a few balls with me. So I remember, going to Alex Olmedo's home and having a chance to hit with Alex and with Rick Leach and Lutz and even with Stevie Johnson. And I learned a lot just by being on the same courts with those guys.
I'm sure. So tell us about some of the lessons you learned. I mean, obviously, I would guess your tennis technique improved and your strategic approach to the game improved. But what other types of lessons did you learn from these guys?
Well, I think one of the most interesting stories to me was the story that Dick Leach told me about raising Ricky Leach as a tennis player. Rick is the older brother of John. John's married to Lindsay Davenport. Rick is a tennis pro at the Newport Beach Racket Club and still very active, playing a lot of more senior events, does a lot of pro-ams, still an amazing player. John still plays, but I think his focus is mostly on business. And Dick Leach, the second really major coach at USC, he coached between 1980 and 2002. He's still out there, and I see him in a lot of events. So this is one of, kind of the royal families, if you will, of USC tennis. Not everybody remembers all of these names, and so, I think we need to put a lot of the people into context. So, Rick, I think, has won something like 9 Grand Slam doubles titles and, a whole bunch of other titles. So in the course of interviewing both of them, Dick said to me, because I have a daughter who has begun to play tennis, and I was talking to him one day about, how should I go about kind of broaching my daughter to play tennis. I think she has an interest, but I'm not completely sure. And he says, Mark, this is a question that parents ask me all the time. And here's my story with Ricky. Basically, he said, I think that a parent should never force a kid to play any sport or to do anything if they don't show any real interest in it. So he said, in order to gauge Rick's interest in playing tennis, here's what I would do. When Rick was young, I would take him on the court. I think he may have started when he was like 4 or 5, something really incredibly young like that. I'd take him onto the court, and I'd show him how to hit a ball, and then we'd probably hit for about 10 minutes to start, and then gradually I'd increase that. He said, now when Rick really showed some interest, here's what I did. I would play to the point where I think that was enough for the day. And I would say to Rick, after, let's say, 30 minutes, okay, we're done for the day. And Rick would say, what do you mean we're done? He said, I'm just getting started. And Dick would say, nope, we're finished. So he would pick up the balls, walk off the court, and Rick, of course, would have to follow him to the car. And so I said, why did you do that? He goes, well, he said, you don't want to kind of spend so much time on a court and saturate a kid. What you want to do is to have him or her leave hungry for more, right? So I thought this was interesting. So Dick just kept doing this, and Rick would say to him, Dad, I want more. So then, after coming back every day from practice from USC, Dick would take Ricky out, and but before he did, he'd say, hey, Rick, you have to do some chores before we play tennis. You got to take out the trash. You got to cut the grass, right? And Rick would say, okay. So basically, Rick would do those things, and Dick just kept this approach up. Finally, one day he came home, and as he pulled into the driveway, Rick was standing there with the basket of balls and his rackets. And Dick looked at him and said, hey, Rick, we can't play until you've done your chores. And Rick turned to him and said, Dad, they're all done. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Dick's approach was, I'm going to let my son really kind of determine how much he loves this game. And if he's willing to do the chores ahead of time, and if he's willing to do what I say, and if I'm willing to not push him way too hard and oversaturate him, then I think his motivation is going to be there, and that motivation will ultimately fuel his desire to be a good tennis player. And he did the same thing with John.
Wow. Smart dad.
Very, very smart. And of course, the other funny story about those guys is that Rick played so much tennis that he ended up with, a severe case of tendinitis as a young kid. And basically, he was told by the doctor that you just can't play for months and months. Your bones are still forming. You could do permanent damage. And so Dick said to Rick, you cannot touch a racket, right? So Rick thought for a while, and about a week later, apparently, he said to his dad, hey, Dad, show me how to play with my other arm.
Oh, wow.
And that's what he did. And legend has it that he actually won a match or matches in a tournament playing with his other hand. So
funny.
That's how motivated, Ricky was with the game.
That's amazing. Well, let's hear some of the other stories, because I think, as tennis parents, we have so much to learn from those who have come before us. And I think that's what's so cool about the fact that you're doing this research and that you've written this book, Mark, is you're sharing these stories with the world. And it's really an inside peek at how these players developed and, what motivated them and inspired them to reach that highest level of college tennis.
Well, Lisa, let me tell you one story that I know is on a very sensitive topic, and that is homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
kind of as a tennis player, but as an outsider to the college process. I'm not involved in who Peter Smith decides to recruit. I'm a bystander, but at the same time, I also serve as an ad hoc academic advisor to all the guys on the men's team and some of the women on the women's team. So I have a firsthand look at the impact of homeschooling on a lot of these young guys in particular. Here's what I have discovered. I think that many of, not all, but many of the young men who come into a place like USC, and I've heard similar stories at Stanford and other places, who come in homeschooled simply are not well prepared academically and also socially as a result of homeschooling. I'm not saying that...
Can I ask you a point of clarification before we go further? When you say homeschooling, are you lumping virtual school in with that, or is that separate in your opinion?
I can't say I know that much about virtual school per se. I would, in terms of the micro details, but I would include that probably in this. And I guess my meaning is that if you are no longer in a bona fide classroom with other students, you're not attending a physical school, that maybe you're sitting at home, and a parent or somebody else is taking you through a lesson plan, each day or, on a schedule. I guess that's what I mean by homeschooling.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that for listeners.
Yeah, sure. And, again, it's not to say that a student doing that, if highly motivated, they can succeed, obviously, academically. But in my experience, and I think in talking to Peter Smith as well, we both have concerns that, and in fact, I've witnessed this firsthand, some of the players on both the men's and women's teams have come into a place like USC, which is an academically rigorous environment, and have just completely freaked out. Part of it is because I think on the academic side of the underconfidence of being in the classroom, because USC is highly competitive now. They have something like 65,000 applications for like 3,000 spots, right? So when you are coming in, even if you're recruited as an athlete, you're still going to be in there competing in the classroom with really, really strong students with academic backgrounds, from the world's or the country's best private schools or public schools, or students who have succeeded from other types of schools, all very hungry to do well in the classroom. So what happens a lot of times, if you come in underconfident and you see what's going on around you in the classroom, I've seen kids just freak out. And I think the other thing about homeschooling, which again, and believe me, I'm no expert on this, so I don't really mean to be lecturing anybody on this. Just my observations are that often the students who are homeschooled have a hard time dealing with stress on campus, stress in social situations, stress in the classroom, because perhaps if they've been taken out of the high school experience, and high school is very formative when it comes to, dealing with social problems at school and things like that. You develop, techniques and ways to deal with problems that you may be facing, at a physical high school. That experience, if you've missed it, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a stressful situation in a college context, it can also cause, some young men and women to freak out. They don't know how to handle the stress. Another example would be taking exams. In homeschooling, my understanding is that often you take exams based upon, your own personal progress. Whereas, at a physical campus, you're taking exams when the professors, have the exams listed on the syllabus. And,
right.
You've got to be ready, right? You can't say, I'll take it in a couple of weeks, right? You've got to be ready. You've got to prepare ahead of time and get this work done. And that can freak people out as well. So I guess the bottom line for me is to say to parents thinking about this, just really do your homework and understand that homeschooling can be a good thing for some people, but there's got to be a mix of kind of social interaction and making sure that the students that are homeschooled are going to be really well prepared to be able to compete in an academic environment like a USC or a UCLA or a Stanford or Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if any of the players that you entered for your book, Mark, talked about their time in junior tennis and their experience in junior tennis, because I know things are very different now than they were when I was playing junior tennis back in the 70s. The whole tournament structure is very different. The prevalence of parents being everywhere with their kids now is very different from what I grew up with, and so I'm curious if any of the players shared those experiences with you.
Lisa, yes, the answer is definitely yes, and I think that when you're playing at a place like USC or Stanford or UCLA or any of the top colleges, just about everybody that you're going to play against, in the country. Especially, I can speak, with more knowledge about the Pac-12. Many of the young guys coming in, when they're playing against UCLA or Stanford or Oregon or Washington, they know the guys they play against because they played against them in the juniors.
Right.
And so what's interesting is I've, talked to them about some of these matches. They will say to you, "Oh, that guy, has a great reputation. He's a really good guy," or "That guy's a terrible reputation. He used to cheat me like crazy, when we were in the juniors." And so I think that the thing I took away from all this, again, whether you take these opinions, as gospel or not, which I typically don't, but I think impressions are formed in junior tennis that carry forward for the rest of your tennis career. And, I remember one case of a player from another team where everybody had a very bad opinion of this young man because he was known to, cheat a lot in junior tennis. And basically, these guys didn't want anything to do with him and were hoping that maybe with maturity, that he would stop cheating on the court. Now, the other thing that happens in college tennis, of course, is, we have referees for every match. And now we have things like play sight, on the court. So if there are disputes with line calls, they just kind of basically stop the match and, have play sight, which records, every angle of the court. They can tell you whether the ball's in or out.
Let's be clear. USC has that. Not
USC
every school has
yes.
that.
No, absolutely. No. I should clarify that. Yeah.
Yes.
USC has that, and again, I can't speak to every D1 program, but my guess is in a lot of the matches, and maybe at all levels, D1, D3, they have referees on the court. I know when I played in college, there wasn't a referee in sight, so we made our own line calls. But to show you how different things. Well, maybe they're not so different in one sense. Did you know that in college tennis, if you serve a ball and it's a let, that the receiver must play the ball?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In women's college tennis, that's not the case.
Right.
It's a let.
Right. Only on the men's side. Right? Yeah. Only on the men's side.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I think that says something about the perception of men's tennis coming out of high school or whatever. Maybe it's a signal to the players that the line calls have to be good, and if not, now we have all these other mechanisms. And frankly, I've seen very little cheating in the college ranks. Very little cheating, but the players tell me that in junior tennis, it's still quite rampant, and so that's one of the things they talk about.
Well, so do you have any specific stories you can share? I don't want you to give away your whole book, but, it'd be fun to hear some good ones.
Well, yeah, I mean, I I guess without giving away too much, because I want people to read some of these stories. There's one in particular that stands out. I won't name names here because, again, just for the sake of fun, in one sense. I remember an instance in the mid '80s when USC was playing against another university, and there was a huge dispute that went on with a line call. And what's interesting is that the USC player had triple match point against this other player. And it was in a very important match. And the USC player served the ball, second serve, and he thought the ball was in, or it hit the line. The player on the opposing team called the ball out. Now, our player was known to have a fiery temper. So what he did is he went up to the net and he said to the player, that ball was so clearly in. The match should be over. Show me where the ball landed, right? So the opposing player points to the alley and says the ball was in the alley. And at which point, the USC player completely lost his head and came around the other side of the net and pushed the other player. At which point he was disqualified from the match, right? So
wow.
You have triple match point. Okay, maybe he got a bad call, maybe he didn't. He still got 2 more points to go. It's going to be 40-15, right? Instead of just kind of maintaining his cool and trying to win one of the next couple of points, he loses it completely and forfeits the match. And what came out of that incident is a rule that says if a player crosses a court like that, they're immediately disqualified, even if they don't even touch the player. So that rule came out based upon that specific incident that took place at USC in the 80s.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. I've got one other good one for you that is a little bit more lighthearted, okay? This is in a match. This is the 2014 NCAA championship match with everything on the line. USC's playing Oklahoma, and the USC is up 3-2, and our player on the number 4 court, Max de Vroom, really nice guy from the Netherlands, is up 5-4, and he's about to serve. It's the third set, and Max is so nervous as he's switching sides. I was about 20 feet away from him. He picks up the water bottle that he's drinking from, and his hands are shaking so much that the whole water bottle spills all over his shirt, and not a drop goes into his mouth. Right?
No.
So it's a really interesting scene, and we were down in Athens, Georgia, and there were about 400 or so Oklahoma fans and about 20 USC fans, and so it was a very lopsided audience. So Max is playing a great game, but basically he's now ahead 40-30. It's match point against Andrew Harris from Oklahoma. And just before...
I think I was at that match.
Were you? Oh,
I think
okay.
so,
well,
but keep going.
Well, so just at match point, coaches are allowed to coach on the court, right, in college tennis. So Peter Smith walks up to Max and whispers something in his ear, right? At which point Max looks at him, kind of nods his head, very serious look on his face, and Peter Smith walks off the court. Max has got a really high toss on his serve, tosses the ball up really high, and hits this incredible topspin serve to Harris's backhand. Harris has one of the greatest one-handed backhands in college tennis at the time. And he winds up and hits this topspin backhand cross-court. It's a screaming shot. And Max has followed the ball in after his serve, and the ball looks like it's going to pass him, to Max's backhand volley. Max leaps in the air and barely gets his racket on the ball and hits the volley down the line for a clean winner, to win the match and the title, USC's 21st national title. On that shot. So after the match is over, I'm dying to hear what Peter Smith says to Max, right? So later on that night after the match, we're all in the bar celebrating, and I said, Max, you got to tell me, what did Peter say to you? And Max turns to me and he grins and he says, well, he said this. He said, big topspin serve to the backhand, come to the center of the court, be ready for the backhand volley, hit the winner, and then let's go home. So I said, he said all that to you? And he said, yeah. He said, and the reason I knew what to do is, he said, because we had practiced exactly this situation maybe 100 times. He said, Peter's told me you were going to be in this situation many times because of this guy's great backhand return. He likes to hit the ball cross court. You're going to need to practice this. So apparently Max just kept practicing and practicing and practicing as they were preparing for the NCAA championship. And sure enough,
wow,
that practice paid off.
I love that. That's amazing. That is an amazing story. Well, that's good coaching right there. Good scouting and good coaching.
Well, I think, one of the things that in writing this book, I kind of determined about Peter Smith is that he is one of the calmest people when it comes to the NCAA tournament. And, I think he believes that all the preparation that he's done with the team, the whole year really kind of culminates, in that NCAA tournament. So in the finals, because, Peter has won 5 national titles himself, he said that I kind of now know how to really kind of, control my emotions, be very calm. He said, because frankly, if I'm not calm, if I show a lot of emotion or I'm irritated or agitated, he said, then it rubs off directly onto the team. If the team sees me as being very loose and, happy to be there, he said, they all relax. And I think that one of the things that has come out, Lisa, in writing this book is that, the 3 greatest coaches at USC, George Tolley, Dick Leach, and Peter Smith, they were all very calm people, when it came to the big pressure matches, the big pressure points. They never went crazy, whereas I've seen coaches from other teams, they're so tense and uptight that it translates directly down to the players. And I would think, the same goes for, high school coaches and players and, any coach and a player. If the player senses that the coach is really, really tight, then there's a good chance that those emotions and that feeling will translate down to the player. And it's something that
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I watch very carefully now. I watch Peter in every match, and you'll see that he's calm, as calm and cool as a cucumber. And, when the team loses, he doesn't go crazy. He may get upset, but he doesn't, kind of yell and scream at people. That's just not the way that he operates. And I think that it's all the preparation is critical, because Peter's, feeling is that what really wins matches is character. The character of the players, the character of the coach. And what he means by that, I think, is that, if you define character, as a set of characteristics of a person that allows them to deal appropriately with, the events that come their way, with the people they meet and the situations they're in, if they can deal with them really effectively and do the right thing, if you will, then the notion of character carries you forward a great deal, in every life context, and in what we're speaking about on the court. And so I think that Peter really tries to instill this. So he's very clear about how people train. If people are engaged in substance abuse, they're gone from the team. If they're really found to be disruptive to the team over, a long period of time or even a short period of time, and if counseling doesn't work, this rarely ever happens at USC, but, if it does, those guys are often asked to leave the team as well. Because Peter always says, you got one bad person on the team, it will be, like a cancer on the rest of the players. And so he's very clear about that.
Well, one of the things that I know about his coaching in recent years is that there is definitely a culture around the team at USC. Culture is one of act. It's one of hard work. It is one of good character, as you said, doing the right thing. All of the young men that I know, and I know quite a few who've played for Peter, have gone on to do really well in the world. They have a very solid foundation of what it means to work hard, to work well, and to be productive and to make good use of their time and to do it all in a manner that is ethical and moral and, that sets them up for being, I'm using air quotes, marketable out in the world. He prepares those young men for that. And it's very impressive. And my listeners know I'm a Bruin, but I have a kid that's a Trojan. So my money went to USC. So I am a fan of USC and especially of Peter and what he's been able to do with his team there. And, I was friends with Steve Johnson Sr. and, saw how he and Peter worked together to help Stevie have an incredible career while at USC and beyond. And, I mean, Peter's relationship with these young men doesn't end when they graduate. It continues on. And there's a lot to be said about a coach that takes that type of interest in their player.
Well, Lisa, I think you're spot on with what you just said. I think that what Peter does is that, he actually creates an environment, a really fun but disciplined environment for the players. So he's open to a wide variety of ways to improve performance, and that includes bringing in sports psychologists, to talk to players on an individual basis, and as a team. He brings in the latest technology, like the play site stuff. He's got training techniques and gadgets that are kind of always coming in. In fact, every week when I go down there's usually some new training technique that they're trying out, to kind of improve performance. The team, to kind of stay in shape, they just don't hit, as Case Van Hoff once said to me, we just don't hit, 200 cross-court forehands and 200 cross-court backhands a day. We'll do some of that, but then we'll go out and play ultimate frisbee, or we'll play basketball. The whole idea is to create feelings of competitiveness in everything that we do. And Chris Quinta, the associate coach, is always telling me, he said, Mark, I'm a really competitive guy. If you're playing chess against me, I want to win. And he said that, we try to, instill this culture of winning in the right way, by maximizing talent. But more than anything else, getting the best out of these young men so that, as you say, once they leave, USC, we want them to be successful in whatever they choose to do, whether it's on the tour or in business. And I think that ultimately, I've seen guys mature, from when they were freshmen to seniors. And as they mature, of course, their tennis game matures. They tend to listen to the coaches. Sometimes when young players come in to any team, especially after they've had a lot of training and lessons their whole life, they kind of think, I know it all. I know how to hit strokes. I know this, that, and the other. But you come to a UCLA or a USC or a Stanford, in part because of the coaches, right? And I've heard people say, I don't listen to my coach at other schools. I know what to do. I'm not really getting any value added from listening to that person. But at USC, I find that the players listen to the coaches. Peter and Chris have many, many, one-on-one sessions with each of the players. Then they have a team practice. These guys are doing weight training in the morning. Peter himself is a very competitive guy. He's in the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, right? He's won all these father and son matches.
Right. I was just getting ready to say he competes like crazy.
He competes like crazy, and he's still able to hold his own on the court with these guys. And I think that's another part of the secret sauce of USC is that I think the players really respect him and Chris Quinta because they can still hit a tennis ball. They can go out there and, it's not to knock anybody who doesn't do that anymore, but I think one added advantage that, USC has is they really respect these guys because they're really good players still, and they can demonstrate what needs to be done on the court. And I think that just adds a little bit extra to the team's psyche that, these guys are out there with us every day. They're sweating the same way we are, and, these bonds develop between the players and the coaches, which are incredibly strong. So I'll go into the team room. Let's say I go down today. It's quite likely that I'll see tennis players from many other years kind of sitting there or on the court. I've gone down and seen Stevie Johnson there quite a lot, or Ray Sarmiento or Daniel Wynn. When they're off the tour, they're down at USC kind of palling around, or Prakash Amritraj comes down and gives inspirational talks to the team. So these guys they never ever quite leave USC. They're always kind of lurking around, and I think it's testimony as to how much they love the team and love the coaches.
I think that's right. And USC does a phenomenal job with its alumni networks and all of that, of keeping alums involved. And even for my daughter, she was a theater major, but she's on campus quite a bit as well, at the theater department. So I know that to be true of that university as a whole. And I think that's one of the great things about going to USC and graduating from USC is having access to all of the alumni benefits that they provide to their graduates. It's fantastic. Well, Mark Young, you are the author of Trojan Tennis, A History of the Storied Men's Tennis Team at the University of Southern California. And your book is now available. Let us know how we can get that. It's on, I think by the time this airs, it will be available on Amazon. How else can we get our hands on it?
Yes. I think by the third week in April or so, the book will be available on Amazon, the Barnes & Noble website, and I think other bookstores will carry it. For those of you out there who are really interested and would like to get a signed copy from me, Lisa, maybe you can supply an email address for me, and I'd be happy to tell people how they can do that.
Sure. Yeah, I will have your email address in the show notes, so people can just check notes for that.
Okay. And, to all of you Trojans out there, and to all of you who are would-be Trojans, I'd encourage you as tennis players to kind of take a look at USC's program and see if it's for you. I can tell you that on both the men's and the women's teams, we have great players and great coaches, and I've just been really, really honored to be able to write this story because, the story is a really rich one. And I think the book's about 400 pages long, and it's got a lot of photographs of, people who played beginning at the turn of the 20th century all the way up to the present. And, there's other interesting stuff like the ties between USC tennis and Hollywood, which might be of interest to some people. So I think that the program is a great program, and like I said, it's really been my honor to write its history.
Well, that's fantastic. I know by the time, again, this airs, the launch party will have already happened, but can you tell us a little bit about what's happening on April 6th?
Yes, on April 6th, we're having this big kind of launch party for the book, and the idea was to try to bring back the Trojan tennis players from all different eras. So I'm hoping that there'll be, some guys coming in who played, maybe in the early 50s, all the way up to the present. And what's nice about this is we'll have keynote speeches by Alex Olmedo and Dennis Ralston and Bob Lutz, Kees van Hoff, Rick and Dick Leach. Other Trojans I know are coming back, like Luke and Murphy Jensen will be there. Prakash Amritraj will be there. Dick Bornstedt. People who have played on these teams years ago, maybe together for the first time, that anyone remembers, all in one room, kind of talking about USC tennis, trading stories, and I think it's going to be a really fun night.
Oh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be wonderful, and it's right after, the USC UCLA tennis match, and I tell you, if you ever have a chance to see a USC UCLA tennis match, it's one of the greatest rivalries in college tennis. And these guys, their games just rise when they're playing against each other, as I'm sure you know. And it's just enormous fun, whether it's at Westwood or, kind of on USC's campus. The crowds that turn out, for these matches. I mean, the last time I think USC played UCLA at USC, it was more than standing room only. I mean, people were wedged into that stadium like sardines. And the matches are always brilliant and incredibly fun to watch.
Well, congratulations to you on the book, and enjoy the party on the 6th. And I know the book is going to just be a huge success. And for my listeners, I hope you will check the show notes, get Mark's email address, and reach out to him and get an autographed copy, or at the very least, check out Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com and get a copy that way. I'm waiting for my copy to come in the mail. I'm so excited. I can't wait to break into it. But Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. You are a professor at USC. You've got a lot going on in your life, and we so appreciate you being with Parenting Aces today.
Lisa, thank you very much. It's really been my pleasure to talk about this book, which I thoroughly enjoyed writing. It's actually a book that changed my life and my understanding of the game. So I hope all of you enjoy it.
Thank you. And to my audience, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Parenting Aces. I'm Lisa Stone, and you've been listening to the Parenting Aces podcast. For tennis parents, by a tennis parent. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to us and write a review on iTunes. For more information on navigating the junior and college tennis journey, please visit us online at parentingaces.com. Thanks for tuning in and sharing us with your tennis community.